Hi and welcome to Huripec Talks. My name is Sylvie Namwase from the School of Law at Makerere University, and I'm also a postdoctorate researcher at Huripec. On today's final episode of our series on militarization, we reflect on history, the present, and the future. And we ask ourselves the question, is Uganda in a cycle of militarization? Which is also the title for today's episode. Here to explore this topic with me is the distinguished Dr. Jimmy Spire Ssentongo. Dr. Spire is a lecturer of philosophy at Makerere University and Uganda Martyrs University. He is also a cartoonist, columnist, and author of some outstanding works, including titles such as What I Saw When I Died, Quarantined, Uncomfortable Laughter, and Inquiry into Withering Heritage, the relevance of traditional Uganda approaches to sustainable environmental conservation today. Dr. Spire, you're most welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
And to our dear listeners, once again, I'd like to remind you that if you're interested in research and discussions on human rights, law and peace in Uganda and East Africa, then Huripec Talks is for you. The show is hosted by Makerere University in Uganda and features experts and opinion leaders. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications to stay in the loop with the latest research and discussions. And now on to the episode. Dr. Spire, over the course of this series, we have reflected on the history of militarism and militarization in Uganda. We have also considered how militarization is manifesting in our Ugandan society, its relationship with law, gender, youth and the economy, and peace, and Pan-Africanism, among other aspects. But in all this, we have yet to truly reflect on where we are going with militarism as a country, which is pervasive, by the way, in our lives and in more or less every aspect in our society. And in order to have this conversation, that is to reflect about where we are going, I think we need to first of all understand ourselves as citizens, Africans. And so I ask that in your view and based on your own observations and reflections about our society today, has there emerged a new type of citizen over the years under a militarized Uganda? And if so, what type of citizen do you think has emerged?
Well, thank you. Thanks for that introduction and for that interesting question. I wouldn't say that there has emerged a particular kind of citizen or one kind of citizen. There have emerged different kinds of citizens depending on what the push factors are and how the different citizens interact with the circumstances. But what I would say is quite predominant in the kind of citizens that have emerged is a citizen in fear. You see that there are so many people who are scared of talking about certain things, of discussing certain topics. Whatever is deemed to be against the interests of certain people, especially the powerful, you will, for instance, for me who does a lot of work on social media, you will tweet on certain matters and immediately people come in asking, in what color do you want your drone? Are you really ready to talk about this? All these are signals to show that increasingly there are things that people think it's not within their right or within their mandate to discuss as citizens, which otherwise wouldn't be the case because the matters about which they fear are matters that concern everyday life, are matters that concern rights, are matters that concern the well-being of citizens. For instance, when you come out to talk about torture, you talk about the presence of the military in certain spheres where you don't expect them to be. You come out to question the first son and his involvement in politics. So why wouldn't citizens be able to question that if it's within their constitutional mandate? I think all this speaks to the kind of environment that we are creating, both directly and by the signals that people see. Because as human beings, we decide on the course of action to take, we decide on how to act on the basis of our study of our environment. When I see that a friend or someone I've heard of, I know of, has been kidnapped, that is going to influence what I do and what I don't do. But we also have the other citizen who refuses to be pushed into fear. We still have some voices, those that are speaking with their identities not hidden, although that is a small group and it's increasingly reducing. Then we have those that have decided to find other means of speaking. That if it's dangerous to speak directly, if it's dangerous to speak with my identity, then they create fake identities. There are so many fake accounts you see on Twitter, on Facebook, but still talking about matters that they would otherwise be talking about in their real identities. But all those are ways of going about reducing space for expression, a shrinking space where people feel that even if it's shrinking, we have to talk, so they find alternatives. Many of the things that we condemn, for instance, the increase in languages that we would otherwise say are uncouth, or otherwise say this is not really acceptable, the use of obscenity. Why would people resort to obscenity? Why is it that we are increasingly seeing people resorting to abuse, to insulting? It's because they've tried civil means, but no one is listening. So it's just the expression I like using. It's a weapon of the weak. Weak people will always fight with what they have. If all they have is insulting, they will insult. So that doesn't mean that insulting is normalized, that now it's okay. But it means that it's the tool that has been created by desperation.
And even I would venture comedy. Right? Yeah. You yourself are in this department. So I think also comedy and humor as a coping mechanism. Although I also wonder if you can engage me a bit on comedy, perhaps also fine as a coping mechanism, but perhaps also as a way to mask trauma, I would imagine. I don't know, I forgot that. It's one of those that I think are very, very important, are that increasingly becoming popular. Yes. And if you study societies that are dictatorial, countries where democratic space is limited, you'll find that there is a lot of humor in many of them. So humor serves a number of purposes. First, it is therapeutic. Yes. The pains that people go through, they will always find a way of relieving that pain. We are not going to be sorrowful all the time, so we need something to laugh about. There will be a constant saturation of memes, of jokes all the time. In Ugandan WhatsApp groups, I think that's what you mostly see. I asked a Nigerian friend some time back why Nigerians are always joking, and he said that if we don't joke about things that we see every day, they will kill us. So I think it's therapeutic in a way, but it's also creating a different language of speech, a coded language where we can talk about things that we think are dangerous. If we cannot speak to them directly, for instance, on this, on the subject of tribalism. Yes. Which has been made to be so sensitive that whoever talks about the tribalism is accused to be the tribalist. Yes. Or you're trying to divide people now. So what do people resort to? There is this group, Bizonto. You saw what they did. They just got a list of people that they thought were from a certain region. So-and-so who is from Acholi, so-and-so who is from Lango. It seems to be a joke, but they are communicating very serious matters. But it also places the powerful in a dilemma. What do you do with a comedian? What do you do with someone who the society will say they are just joking? So if you come up very strongly against them, you will appear to be unserious. Everyone will say, now government is fighting with comedians. The government is now fighting with cartoonists. Yet the comedians, the cartoonists are communicating very serious matters, but in a way that disarms the powerful. Yeah. There is a group that was active in Serbia during the time of Milosevic. They would come up with different stunts. There is a time when the president said, Milosevic at the time, that they managed to save the country by using blood, that they shed blood. Of course, they came in through some sort of guerrilla war.
we managed to shape this country by blood. So don't think that we'll get out anyhow. Actually, it's the wife who said. So what this group did, they mobilized people to donate blood. After donating blood, they say, now let's take their blood back. let's give them their blood back. The mobilization is around a very positive gesture of donating blood. Yeah. And government cannot stop people from donating blood. But then when they tie it to take back your blood, the message is straight and clear that you have nothing to do about it. When General Tumwine said, the late General Tumwine, that he lost his eye fighting for Uganda, there are some Ugandans who said, can we give it back to you? Which sounds to be rude. It sounds mean. But you ask yourself, why would people get to this rudeness? Which is in sort of a joke that there is something important that they are communicating. So I think humor is quite important in societies like ours to create alternative spaces for speech. Yeah.
But then it also masks trauma, I think.
Yeah, it does. That is one of the reverse sides of it. Yes. Not just reverse, covering trauma and sometimes not allowing it to heal. But sometimes when you joke about serious matters, they start appearing to be unserious. Everyone will joke about the matters and it passes like that. And Ugandans have learned to joke about everything, almost everything. And at some moments you get that feeling that, okay, are we going to joke about everything and it just continues passing? But you also, on the other hand, asking, if we don't joke about them, what will we do? Do we have an alternative powers to change them, for instance? Do we have alternative powers to engage through direct means? So it is some sort of a dilemma. You know that humor comes with its limitations, but also it's only coming in to fill in a void that is created maybe in ways that are beyond people's powers at the time. Yeah.
And in that sense, yes, it's a way of coping. It's a form of resistance in that way. But I wonder whether you've also seen now some more volatile, more animated expressions of resistance that could point to perhaps the other side of or the other extreme end of humor, especially among the youth population.
Volatile in what sense?
For instance, through protest.
Yeah, many young people have tried that,
yes.
Especially under Dr. Kizza Besigye's mobilization.
Yes.
We saw a number of people resorting to the streets. We saw a number of people with placards about this and that matter. We saw people throwing pigs at Parliament. We saw people carrying TVs. Someone took a TV to Parliament when they were passing that. Was it a policy that was supposed to subscribe to watch TV? Someone went with that. I think it was Segirinya by then. But you increasingly see that dying out. Why is it dying out? From November 2020, when over 50 or 60 something people were killed on the streets protesting when Kyagulanyi had been arrested. I think from that time people feared going to the streets. And it's understandable. I understand that there are contexts where people have been shot on the streets, such as under apartheid South Africa, and they still went back. They shot at students, but you would still see that people are going there. Maybe we have not yet reached to that point, but you see that there is a bit of withdrawal, mostly towards social media. Actually, it's mostly social media now. Outside social media, you don't see alternative forms of expression. We don't have any parks where you will go sit, maybe for a sit-down protest. So,
there are no spaces to protest.
Yeah. So it's what I talked about earlier, that the space for expression of dissent keeps narrowing, it keeps shrinking. But every time it shrinks and people run to a smaller corner, that should also send a signal. What will happen when that corner is also blocked? I think people will have no other alternative but now to resort to even more violent means. Because naturally, I don't think there is any group of people that will allow to be suppressed for so long without doing anything. They try speaking, you block it. They try going to the streets, you block it. They go to social media, you come up with these laws, the Computer Misuse Act in the different forms in which it has been presented, online harassment, what is it called? That act on harassment, cyber harassment, which we clearly see that they are not coming in a good spirit. Yes, social media or internet has to be regulated. We know that there are bad things that go on there. But the spirit in which the regulation is happening, and by those who have been targeted, those to whom the law has been applied, you clearly see that it's about silencing. So the more you silence, I think the more you create room for more undesirable responses. When I started a campaign some time back, the exhibitions on Twitter,
yes,
which were basically demanding for better services in terms of transportation, the roads, health, security, and so on. A number of people raised this as, they were complimenting me, saying, somewhere from government actually, it's good that Spire is showing them that you can express dissent without shedding any blood, without destroying people's businesses, so this is the way to go. But I understood, while I would desire to take the compliment, that one of the things they were doing was to create a narrative that presents street protests as outdated, that presents whoever would want to go to the streets as doing a wrong thing. Now Spire is the model. He's doing what you're supposed to do. So that ultimately everyone runs to social media, and then when social media is blocked, they both manage to block the streets and social media. Yeah, so I commend those who are going to social media, but only in the sense of broadening the spaces that are available.
And the different approaches. And I would imagine there's also a sense that social media will not yield any result, tangible result. I mean, there is that apprehension among some circles that fine, we are doing these exhibitions on social media, people are talking and they are venting their frustrations, but ultimately the status quo remains. What do you say to that?
I think it's a matter of we just need to measure the evaluation of such campaigns. Certainly they cannot solve all problems, but there are those that they solve, and there are certain things that they set in motion which perhaps could not be set in motion by other means. For instance, when we started these campaigns, I know of so many people who have come to me to say, oh, you emboldened me also to speak out. I've always been using my social media just to talk about my business, to make fun, jokes. But through those campaigns, I learned that I can use social media even to demand for accountability, to demand for better services. So even when those voices are 1, 2, 3, it shows you that there is an impact at that level. Second, you saw those who are concerned coming out in some of the campaigns. When we were exhibiting potholes, the president came out and released the money that was released, although not really much. And it didn't do much, but it showed that the voice had reached, because there are many other forms we have used and we did not even get any response.
Indeed.
So the president came out, parliament debated it, we saw ministers talking about it, we saw to the point that there was a time when the leader of opposition was moving around visiting schools, and then he tweeted there was a certain terrible school he visited. Spire here is something that you need to exhibit. And then everyone was on his case. Now, why should you be calling on Spire to exhibit? Do you mean that you have, that for you don't have an option, that Spire has to come to help you to exhibit? But the point I'm making is that the exhibitions showed across board that even social media in its limited form, it can do something. It can call on the powerful in ways that they cannot stop. I know while many of our leaders have become shameless, it reaches a point where even a shameful person would feel like doing something when you're seeing potholes all over and spreading internationally, because some time back I attended a conference in Arusha, Tanzania, and they were telling me, oh, we were seeing the potholes in Kampala. We have been seeing them on our social media. So any leader, any shameless leader will reach a point where they feel, we need to do something. I think that's why they came up to patch them, fill them with soil. Up to now, you see that there are so many knee-jerk reactions of trying to patch up. They do not have a systematic plan of addressing the problem, but they are trying to cover up for the embarrassment. So I think, yes, it will not solve everything, but there is so much that it's doing. Actually, I've managed to get information from some of their circles, like the NGO exhibition that we had. I've talked to a number of them, and they said there have been so many debates within their circles ever since that exhibition.
Indeed.
We were invited to talk to, it's called the NGO Forum, their umbrella body. They invited us to raise some of the issues that we collected, the views that we collected during the exhibition, but they were trying to see if they can do something. They have had many conversations towards trying to address matters of mistreatment of workers, issues of corruption within civil society, and many of other such issues. So I don't think that would be something that we discount in looking at what social media can do. But as I said earlier, we don't need to present it as the magic bullet that will solve all problems. There are things it can do, there are things it can't do. That's why it should only come in as an alternative, not as a replacement of everything else that others have been doing.
And I agree with that. And for me, all that you have said up to this point has one common denominator that sticks out for me, and that is the citizens' engagement. You started off by admitting that there has been a citizen who is fearful that has emerged out of this process. There is one who resorts to humor, satire, many other coping mechanisms. But there is that who is embraces activism in one way or another. Some on the street, others on social media. But in all cases, there is engagement. There is citizen engagement.
Yeah.
So retreating and hoping that some miracle will happen without citizen engagement, I think for me, would be the wrong stance to take.
Yeah,
from everything that you have said. One way or another, whichever way, shape or form we come in as citizens, whether we are fearful, whether we are the comedians, we are finding ways of engaging with the status quo because we don't like it. We want to change it. So I appreciate that. But then now on to more macro issues. Do you think that with this trend of militarization, where from the course of these episodes we have seen clear systems, strategies of suppressing institutions or taking over institutions, and a downward trend towards authoritarian rule and military rule, can we continue in this way and still speak about peace and security in Uganda? What do you think?
Yeah, certainly not, because there is peace in the sense, or maybe it also depends on how we define peace. Many people have defined peace in terms of absence of war, which I think is a very limited understanding of peace. Or peace in the sense that you do not see confrontation anywhere. We don't have people going to the streets, so Kampala is peaceful. The wars in northern Uganda, they've ended, so it is really peaceful. The question we should be asking is, what do we have under there? Are people quiet? Is conflict absent because people are contented or because they simply can't express themselves? I think even if you bring it down to lower levels, lower contexts of engagement, when you know that you're suppressing a person and they are quiet, you cannot live in peace. Even you as the oppressor.
Yes.
Because you don't know what they are thinking, you don't know what they are planning, but you certainly will always fear that they are thinking about something, they are planning something. Even if it's at a home, you oppress your wife, she doesn't say anything. You don't do anything. You don't provide at home. You beat her. She doesn't say anything. She just looks on. I don't think you can be at peace. So that is the context that I see in Uganda. Many people are quiet. Many people don't want to comment about politics out of fear. Many people have withdrawn to measures for increasing their private comfort, measures for seeking for their individual achievements. But it's not that they are resorting to that out of their own desire. It's because they know that by trying to talk about that, this is what is likely to happen. But what happens when there is a trigger? We saw what happened in 2009 in Kampala. They called them the Uganda riots. Yes. No one expected that to happen. It seemed as if Kampala was peaceful. It seemed as if everyone was going about their business. No one had come up with these sentiments of tribalism. What people were quiet. But just the trigger of stopping the Katikiro from visiting Kayunga, people start targeting each other. They start asking them, can you pronounce Omfaliso? The moment you said Omfalaso, they start beating you. That is one of the things that happen when there is a semblance of peace, but people have so much pain inside. You would rather allow them to vent out, speak, so that you get to know what they are thinking, and therefore you find ways of addressing it. When we see the involvement of the military in kidnapping people, as what happened around 2020, 2021, even today you still see reports of people being kidnapped. When you hear about drones, everyone talking about drones, and there is no official answer about them, even when it's presented in parliament. There was at one time a long list of over 200 or 400 people that had been kidnapped, but there wasn't really any clear information that this is what had happened. They were arrested for these reasons, and they have been presented before court, because arresting in itself is not the problem. But if you're not following the proper channels, that is what creates questions about the motivation for it. So when people see all that happening, and they stop commenting about maybe politics, they stop commenting about the involvement of the first son in politics, they stop commenting about how he freely moves about when others' hands are tied, you are not constructing peace. You're simply constructing a semblance of peace that is ultimately bound to explode. So that is what I see in Uganda, that yes, we don't have people fighting, but we see that there is a lot of tension. We see that there is a lot of, there is anxiety about what is likely to happen. Currently we are running the Uganda Tribalism exhibition. Yes. And the moment lists started coming out about how the different institutions, public institutions are staffed, you heard other voices saying, now you want to put us in danger. Now it's like you're saying, this entire group of ours, we are involved, we are not. It's a small clique, it's nepotism. But within those voices, you would also see those that are clearly trying to silence the debate. They are trying to silence the conversation. They'll accuse those who are raising concerns about tribalism in order to silence them. Actually, they just reverse it. They say that you're the tribalist, as I mentioned earlier. But when you successfully do that, especially after seeing that there is so much that people wanted to say, and they had actually started, the lists were coming from all corners, they will eventually keep quiet, of course, if you suppress them. But they will wait for a moment where they can speak by other means. They will wait for a moment where they will feel that now is the right chance to revenge. Now, if we can prevent the cycles of vengeance, the cycles of offense and counter-offense, I think we need to honestly allow people to speak and honestly address the issues that are raised. That is how you can construct peace that is sustainable.
Yes. And by necessary implication, that is how you can also construct a broader understanding of security.
Yeah.
Because
sure.
Security is not just about, the guns and securing the borders or suppressing, civil war. There is such a thing as human security. which is underpinned by precisely those factors that you were mentioning. Are people free to talk? Are they able to coexist? And so I know that over the course of our own study and observation, we have seen this language of security being co-opted and weaponized as a basis to justify why the military should be in these spaces. Even going as far as guarding examination, question papers and answer booklets. So it's then used to permeate, very, very ordinary aspects of our lives, such that it actually ends up becoming the norm. And you might find that actually the way we think about our security has over time just been completely overtaken by the image of the military, that we cannot start envisaging that we are secure Ugandans if the military is not in the picture. Yet it's about bigger things: food security, income. Are you able to take your kid to school? Are you able to get treatment without going bankrupt, without, bankrupting the entire family? These kinds of things that just life good, basically. Make life good, make happy citizens who are then coexisting peacefully with each other. And when you mention, interestingly, about the tribalism exhibition, I think it's actually important for a national dialogue to happen, because incidentally, also one of the discussions that have been in the political sphere and in the run-up to the now stalled national dialogue were about whether or not we have institutions that reflect our national, the national character, including the military. This was one of the institutions that was being discussed. That does it reflect? Is it a national army? And so these are critical questions, because this is an institution that is very important for discourse around peace and security. So you cannot keep hiding behind gaslighting strategies and hope that the problem will somehow resolve itself when the military is increasingly being deployed, across all national sectors. But there is this big question of whether or not it is a national army. That is, for me, a very important issue for us to have conversation and dialogue about as Ugandans, if we're to sustain peace and security in this country.
Sure.
Yeah. So having said all this, and looking back at Uganda's history, looking where we are and where we're going, do you think that Uganda is in a cycle of militarization? And do you think it can get out of this cycle? And if so, how?
Yeah, certainly we are in a cycle, because when you see what is happening now, that the military is present almost in everything, including some otherwise, what would have shocked us if we were in a normal environment. For instance, that when NADS fails, they say, well, I'm going to send the army to NADS to sort it. And the construction of roads fails, I'm going to send the army there. When we talk about potholes, the first son, who is an army general, goes touring the city and says that now SFC is going to fix potholes. So it surely means that we are heading to a direction, or we are already there, where the army is looked at as the ultimate answer to everything. And you mentioned, before I go to the real question you have asked about the representativeness of the army. Naturally, everyone would want to see themselves in every institution. Uganda being a very diverse country, that the constitution talks about 65 ethnic groups. If I come from, let's say, one of the sub-ethnic groups of the Karamojong, when I look at the cabinet, I would want to see myself there. When I look at all these different institutions, I want to see myself reflected there. And I think that in drafting our constitution, we were aware of where we had come from, and we had tried to block some of these possible scenarios, to prevent them. That's why in the national objectives, we talk about constituting a government that represents our national character, the diversity. That when you go to the army, you don't expect to see that all the top generals, or most of them, the biggest percentage, are from one place. And you're told it's for historical factors. But historical factors for 37 years, it's still historical factors that explain that. When you go to a unit which is now perhaps the most powerful within the army, SFC, what is there, the lists that have been circulating during the exhibition, it looks as if it's a tribal unit. So all these things show that we are certainly going back to the things that we were condemning. This government came in riding on those promises that this UNLF government or the government of Obote, it was militaristic, did not allow people to express themselves. But when you look now, what is the role of the army in elections? What is the role of the army in everything else? Who does the army represent? So that conversation is very important for us to hold. Do we see any hopes, and where should those hopes lie? I think the hopes of solving this problem lie in institutions. For as long as we cannot allow institutions to work, many of these things will happen, because some of them are instinctive actually. Instinctively, every human being would feel more comfortable with their own. You just put them somewhere in a huge group, within no time you'll see they'll be tending towards their own. And I wouldn't blame that. You can understand it if you have some basic understanding of human psychology, yes, some basic understanding of sociology. You will know that that will happen. And that is the primary reason as to why we have institutions, to regulate these tendencies. In a society so diverse like ours, if you don't regulate those tendencies, you're going to see an army that is increasingly from one side. You're going to see that most of the important jobs are filled by people from one side. You're going to see the violence where a certain group feels threatened. They will resort to violence in order to protect its privileges. We talk about Amin having been excessive in his dictatorship, that he was a very violent person. But those who studied Amin will tell you that Amin mostly became violent out of paranoia, out of fear. The feeling that everyone hates you, the feeling that you have enemies around. But why should you feel that everyone hates you? Why should you feel that you have enemies all around you? It will come out of feelings from some people that they are excluded. It will come out of feelings by some people that they are not allowed to voice their own feelings and their desires, that only the desires of some are being realized. So I think the most sustainable thing for peace to do is to include more and more people, or to ensure that people feel included, because it's not enough to include. There should also be a feeling of being included.
Yes.
It should be open out there. If you think that people are suspicious about how, let's say they are talking about Uganda Airlines and how it is staffed, you put the lists out there so that they know that these rumors are wrong. It's not true that it's just representing one area. That helps also to address the perceptions that might be wrong. Because indeed, it's not true that every time people say there is tribalism, that it is tribalism. Sometimes the suspicions are based on ignorance. It's based on lack of proper circulation of information, making information accessible. So come out with very clear strategies for inclusion, make them known, and increase the avenues for people's participation, so that everyone feels they are part of this thing called Uganda. I don't think Ugandans hate Uganda as some want to make us feel. You're always talking negative about your country, you should love your country. No one should even teach me patriotism. It would come naturally if I feel I'm part of the thing they call Uganda. But if the eating is by some people and the patriotism is for others, I don't think I'll feel patriotic. It's under such circumstances that you'll find government feels they need to teach people patriotism, because you have not really done the things that naturally build the patriotism. When you go to countries where they feel that their government are working for the people, you just see the pride in belonging to those countries.
They even rush to pay taxes.
Yes, without anyone having to push them. They feel they are part and parcel of it. But all this will go back to the most important factor of building institutions. if it's not institutions, the individuals will always have those tendencies. For as long as we leave gaps such as the presidentialism that we have in Uganda, that is the president to determine almost what happens in each and every field, those human tendencies will be seen. Not necessarily because the president is bad, but because his the negative side of his humanity will be given room.
Unregulated.
Yes, unregulated. But if you have institutions that will curb, for instance, if we have policies on diversity, that whenever you're recruiting for any government institutions, you should put into consideration the diversity of the applicants. That if, let's say, at Makerere, you have a department that is all Baganda, when you're recruiting, you must deliberately look for people who are not Baganda. But not simply to say, if Baganda are qualified, what do we do? Are they the only ones that are qualified? Sometimes you might even put aside some few considerations of merit in order to include others. Because if you don't include them, they will always look at this list and feel like we have deliberately been left out, and there will be no peace.
And it's really interesting, actually, Spire, how sometimes some of these things self-reinforce. Because also, if you go blindly, without utilizing that affirmative action approach, and in fact, that's the whole logic behind affirmative action, at least for girls at the university, is that there is a group that has been historically marginalized. That means they have no access to some of these tools that would elevate them to qualify well during these job interviews. So then, if you just go by what can we do if the Baganda are the only ones who are qualified, and then you end up with a whole department of Baganda,
actually,
then you're not
be able to ask why.
Exactly, you have to ask. We made a call for applications, but all the applicants are from one region. Why? And then you go deeper into the economics and the social makeup of the country, and then you then adopt those deliberate policies. And I think like Kenya did it after they had those unfortunately violent elections of 2007, 2008. They then took a very deliberate approach on issues of ethnic diversity and equality. They put in place actual legal requirements, for instance, in their police act, and saying when you're recruiting, you should pay attention to national identity in the recruitment processes. So these are issues of which we are silent. And we assume, I tend to feel sometimes as Ugandans that we assume that the goodwill or the good nature of the person will lead them to do the right thing in governance. And we assume we bank so much on human nature, like you said. But governance is very much about engineering and creating the kind of society you want through deliberate laws and policies. We cannot leave it to the goodwill, of the leader, to the benevolence of the leadership, because like you said, human nature will tend towards the other side of democracy. Okay, and so finally, Dr. Spire, there is the concept of demilitarization as a deliberate, targeted process. Do you think that we can achieve this in Uganda? And then do you have any actual policy recommendations more broadly moving forward?
I wouldn't actually even think in terms of policies or suggesting new policies. I think what we have is already quite good. It's just the impunity of violating or abusing what we have. The UPDF Act is very clear about the functions of the UPDF, of what it should be involved in or not. The roles are very clear. And I think if we followed that, well, it has a few gaps here and there. Yes. For instance, the entrenchment of a certain list of individuals in the Act itself, well, notwithstanding their historical contribution. But by and large, I think it provides for what we should do. When you see the involvement of the army, of individuals, certain individuals in politics, which is divisive, it's not that we don't have policies to regulate them, to stop them. It's impunity. When you see how the first son is conducting himself, as a politician, it's not that we don't have laws to stop that, but it's because we have individuals who have grown bigger than the laws, than the policies. So what we should be thinking about should be to create a constitution, maybe some revisions in the constitution that cut on the powers of the presidents. I think much of this goes back to the presidents. What the president can do, can permit or not permit. If those powers are cut, but of course leaving them with some powers to reign over some of these other branches of government, I think it would be possible for Parliament to do what it's supposed to do in controlling the army. It would be possible for the judiciary to do what it's supposed to do in controlling the army. That is what is basically lacking. We have an executive that is too strong, at least the leader of the executive, to the extent that anything that they would want to permit, it can pass. So what we are lacking is not really the specific policies down there to regulate them, but we lack an overall framework that regulates the very powerful, that controls the very powerful from abusing the policies that we have in place. I think that's where we have to look.
Okay, thank you very much, Spire. I don't know if you have any other last very special message to our listeners, to Ugandans.
Not really, maybe apart from saying we should keep the hope and everyone should get involved, not simply waiting on others, because I get so many messages from people asking, Spire, what are you doing about this? And I ask them, but am I working for anyone that I should be the one to respond? Recently, there is someone who actually rebuked me that they sent me a message to fundraise for someone and I did not respond. I said, okay, has it come to this? But it comes from that sort of personal disempowerment and a feeling that someone out there has to do all this. Our role is to simply wait and benefit from the effort of others. If we all came up to do something, I think it would overwhelm those who abuse us. But the more you keep quiet, the more another person gives themselves permission to abuse you even more. Maybe very lastly, I would quote this slavery activist. It was called Washington Douglas. He says that no person is abused without giving them permission to the abuser. That every abuse that comes to you, it comes along with you giving the permission to the abuser. Even if the abuser is more powerful, there are ways in which you can cut on the permission that you give them. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Spire. That's a very powerful note on which to now close our episode and sadly, generally, our series on militarization. So we've come to the end of our discussion today, and specifically the question, is Uganda in a cycle of militarization? We hope it has given us all pause for reflection about where we have been, where we are, and where we want to go. We thank Dr. Spire Ssentongo, Jimmy, for honoring our invitation and engaging us on this conversation. And like I said earlier, this episode sadly marks the end of our first series on militarization. And in this series, we have defined and described various aspects of the concept of militarism and militarization. We have mapped how these phenomena have manifested throughout Uganda's history and our present, in our laws, in our politics and our economy, and in our society where it has impacted gender relations, youth expressions and aspirations. We have also reflected on how these phenomena affect peace in our domestic and regional context through examining theories of decolonization and Pan-Africanism. We hope that this series can be beneficial in furthering wider discussions about how we can build stronger and peaceful societies in Uganda, in Africa, and beyond. We would like to thank all our wonderful guests and all our dear listeners for being with us at the start of this journey for Huripec Talks. Watch out for our next series, which will explore a new topic in relation to Uganda's law, politics, and peace. From us and everyone here, thank you and goodbye.
Makerere, Makerere, we build for the future, the great Makerere, great and mighty, the walls around thee, great and mighty, the gates beside thee, great and mighty, the walls around thee, great and mighty, the gates beside